are kind of interesting. It turns out that money can buy you happiness, but not very much. Rich people, on average, are just a tad happier and satisfied with their lives than poor people. And on the other hand, having more social connections is a very strong predictor of your life satisfaction. And in some sense, we know that's true, right? If you ask people what makes you happy, what's satisfying your life, people don't say the Mercedes is the thing that really turns me on. It's their friends and their family and their community connections. And so that's not surprising. What's a little more surprising is that you ask what's the externality, the external effects of wealth. That is, what's the effect on my happiness of your wealth? And it turns out that the effect on, and this is in general true in the UK and in the United States, the effect on, if you get richer, I get unhappier. So if you get a raise, that makes you a little bit happier, but it makes a lot of us unhappy. And of course, the reciprocal is true too. If I get a raise, it makes you unhappy. And so it turns out that the net effect of us all getting a raise is everybody's a little unhappier. Even though we're all happier about our increase, we're even more, you see what I'm trying to say. On the other hand, social capital has both positive direct and indirect effects. That is to say, if you get married on average, I don't mean every single marriage works out this way, but if you get married on average, you're going to be happier, and so am I. That is, people, as the social capital of people's neighbors rise, they get happier. Whereas as the wealth of people's neighbors rise, they get unhappy. So now, if you think through the math of that, this is a no-brainer. If we all get a little more social capital, everybody's better off. If we all get a little wealthier, nobody's better off. Now, I'm not trying to make an argument here for penury, that we should all enter a monastery or something. But on average, and there are many British scholars who've been making this point even more in a more articulate way than I am, like Sir Richard Layard, Lord Richard Layard. Is that Richard Lord Layard? How do you say that? Well, anyway, Lord Layard, the economist, has been arguing this because if you had, from a net happiness point of view, it does not make sense to give up your friends to make a lot more money. That's a totally crazy thing to do. It won't actually make you happy. I realize I'm beginning to sound now like a Methodist preacher or something. I'm just giving you the facts. So the bottom line is a lot of things we care about are powerfully affected by social networks. And let me just pause over this. One of the implicit lessons that you should have gotten already from what I said is social networks have many, many consequences on many, many different things. They affect education, they affect health, they affect the economy, they affect crime, and therefore the work of many different departments of the national government or local government are affected by social capital, but for nobody is it the main job to worry about social capital. Because, you know, the Home Office has got to worry about a lot of things. They're worried about crime, and social capital is part of that, but it's not the main thing. And the education people are worrying about, the Department of Education is worrying about education, and social capital we know is part of that, but it's not the big thing. And so it's everybody's second or third priority. And therefore, I think in general, social networks and norms of reciprocity are probably under-attended to, underinvested in. Now, I've been associated with, the work Bowling Alone is associated with the claim that over the last 30 years in America, there's been a massive decline in our social capital. I have no idea whether that's also true in the UK. There's kind of mixed evidence as to whether that's true in the UK. But the evidence in the UK is also kind of skimpy, I would say. I don't mean that as a majority. You're a wonderful country. I just mean that the evidence, we have good evidence, for example. In the US, I can tell you that over the last 30 years, there's been a 60% decline in picnics. In 1975, the average American went on 5 picnics. Last year, the average American went on 2 picnics, a little recognized national picnic crisis. And picnics are an example of social capital. We actually don't know what the trends in picnics are in the UK, so I can't tell you for sure. But in the US, we know that there has been a decline in round numbers of about 40 or 50% in virtually every measure of social capital. Membership in organizations, philanthropy, spending time with your family, the number of friends you have, the number of intimate friends you have. One of the questions that's often asked in surveys, and it's a really powerful question, is how many people do you know, if you had some serious personal problem, like you discovered you had cancer or your marriage began to fall apart or something, how many people do you know that you could talk with about that problem? Actually, think privately of yourself now, the answer to that question. How many people do you know that you could talk to about some deep personal problem? I don't know the average in the UK. The average in the US is 3 for men and 9 for women. It's one reason why women on average do better or more resilient, because they just got a better social support network. The predictor of that, your answer to that question actually predicts your life expectancy. Indeed, some people claim that it's a better predictor of your life expectancy than having a physical exam right now. That is, the more social, the denser your support network, the longer you're going to live. Well, that number in the United States has been declining. That is, the number of people that you Americans on average have in their own intimate support network has been declining, as well as other more public measures, like going to public meetings is off by about 40%, and membership in groups, is all sorts of groups, including bowling leagues, is off by about 40 or 50%. And trust is off by about 40 or 50%. Even, I mean, actually just ask yourself this question as a matter of getting some sense of your own social environment. Would you say that most people can be trusted? Or that you can't be too careful nowadays? That question that I've just asked you has been asked hundreds of, thousands of times around the world. In the United States in the 1950s, and in Britain in the 1950s, about 2/3 of all Americans and roughly 2/3 of all Brits said most people can be trusted. That figure in the States is now about 1/3 of Americans say most people can be trusted, and 2/3 say you can't be too careful. There has been a decline too in the UK, although less sharp than that. So, by all of these measures, trust and reciprocity and belonging to groups and going to church and so on, all those, belonging to unions, that's another example, all those are down big time in the United States. And that, I think, is a serious problem for my country. It's something that a lot of people now are concerned about in my country. Whether that's true in other countries, I'm not sure, and you'll be a better judge as to whether that's true in the UK or not. I now want to finish these opening remarks by talking about one particular aspect of the social capital challenge. And it's true specifically in Manchester, but it's also true in most places in the world. And what I'm about to say now could be misunderstood, so I want you to listen. I know you've been listening carefully all along, but this is an area where I want you to listen with care to what I'm saying. First, the most certain prediction you can make about any modern society is that it will be more ethnically diverse a generation from now than it is now. That's true in my country, and it's true in Britain, and it's true in Finland, and it's true in New Zealand, and it's true in Ireland, and it's true in Italy, and it's true in Japan. It's true everywhere. Partly because of increasing immigration, but partly because of differential fertility rates. We're all going to be living in a more diverse, ethnically diverse society than we are living in right now. And fundamentally, that's going to be great. It's fundamentally going to be an advantage for societies that are ethnically diverse, and immigrant societies have a big advantage. In the US, for example, a vastly disproportionate number of our Nobel Prize winners and of our finest artists and so on are all immigrants, not all, but a disproportionate number of them are immigrants or children of immigrants. And ethnic and other forms of diversity in general lead to creativity, and immigration, at least in the United States, and I think that is probably also true in the UK, is helpful for the economy, and it's also, of course, helpful for cuisine. Not in England, of course. England is known for fine cooking. But in the US, it's nice to have a more diverse cuisine, a more diverse culture, and so on. So, this is another one of these cases like the Industrial Revolution where there are big long-term advantages from immigration, I think. I mean, almost all Americans think that, actually. Americans are very positive toward immigration. Doesn't mean we're positive toward all immigrants, but it does mean, in general, we like living in an immigrant society. However, what I also want to ask about is what's the effect in the short run on social capital of immigration and diversity? And there, the evidence that we and other people have collected is actually disconcerting. Because learning to live with diversity is actually not so simple. Now, to some of you that will seem totally obvious. Why did you need a Harvard professor to tell you living with diversity is difficult? But let me try to put in a precise form our findings, which are similar to findings in other countries, but in other settings, but I'm talking about my own work. Holding constant many other features of your life. That is, holding constant how much income you have and how much education you have and what your own ethnicity is and how rich your neighbors are and so on. Holding many, many, many other things constant. The more diverse, ethnically diverse, the census tract you live in, the census tract in America is like the census ward here, it's the three, neighborhood, think neighborhood. The more ethnically diverse the neighborhood you live in America, the less you trust anybody. That is, whites trust whites less in more diverse settings. Blacks trust blacks less. This is not just a matter of racial tension. People trust people who don't look like, are less likely to trust people who don't look like them, and also less likely to trust people who do look like them. And they're less likely to trust their neighbors, and they're less likely to trust local government, they're less likely to trust the cops, they're less likely to trust media. They have fewer friends, the more diverse the setting, the ethnic, the more ethnically diverse the setting. They have, they're less likely to volunteer, they're less likely to think their neighbors will cooperate with them if they get in trouble, they're less likely to work on community projects. The only two things that rise with the diversity of your census tract in America are protest marches and television watching. And what this suggests, now to summarize this is the harder part of the evidence to present, because it's not evidence that I particularly went looking for. I didn't go looking for this actually. In effect, what our data and some other people's data too suggest is that in the presence of unfamiliar diversity, all of us, whites, blacks, Asians, Latinos, people of all different flavors and colors, all of us in the presence of unfamiliar diversity hunker down, we pull in like a turtle from everybody. What our data suggests is not that diversity causes race riots or race wars, it's that diversity causes everybody to pull in and to hunker down and to be less connected and to have lower social capital. Now, if I stop the story there, it sounds like that's a brilliant argument from a Harvard professor for ethnic cleansing, that we would all be better off if we just lived in our own little homogeneous settings. But that's not at all my view. And in order to try to explain what my view is, I need to have us all understand that these lines that we draw among ourselves, I just use the one that's standard in America today, which is whites, blacks, Asians, and Latinos. That's the way we divide up. And I know there are different ways in which folks in Britain currently divide themselves up. Those lines are not God-given and not immutable. They're themselves social constructions. And I want to just end these remarks about diversity with two or three personal anecdotes, if I can. I mean, there actually is data, but I'm not going to tell you the data. I'm going to tell you the stories. First of all, my daughter is married to a Costa Rican immigrant. And for many years, she and her family and the kids and her husband lived in San Jose, Costa Rica. They moved to Pittsburgh 2 or 3 years ago. And my eldest granddaughter, Miriam, went to second grade. She sort of 7 years old, went to school. And at the end of the first week, she came home and said to her mother, my daughter, "Mommy, what's Hispanic mean?" Now, you have to understand my daughter is a historian of race and ethnicity. And she's also a little postmodern, so all of her circuits are a quiver here. But she's a mom, too, right? So this is her daughter asking, so she said, "Well, Miriam, Hispanic is the word that North Americans use to refer to people whose parents come from Latin America."